We now turn to one of our regular features of the BioHealth Capital Region Forum, where we take a look at how the top 10 biopharma clusters are performing in the United States. And to give us this update, we have for the third year in a row, Alex Philippidis, who's the Senior Business Editor of Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News. And he basically does a top 10 biopharma cluster ranking every year, has been doing it for many years. And one of the things we've watched is the BioHealth Capital Region climb to where we're number 4 now, and we have a goal to be a top 3 by 2023. Alex is going to briefly discuss each of the top 10 clusters, discuss how they performed during the pandemic, and also talk about the up-and-coming clusters that are challenging those in the top 10. Alex, welcome again to the BioHealth Capital Region Forum.
Thanks, Rich, for your very kind introduction, and thanks to you and the BioHealth Capital Region for the honor and privilege of inviting me again to address the group virtually. Much appreciated. I write and report and edit for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News. That's GEN. GEN was launched in 1981 by Mary Ann Liebert as the first publication devoted exclusively to biotechnology. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. Wow. GEN delivers critical, high-quality reporting in 6 specialty topics or pillars: cancer, drug discovery, omics, translational medicine, genome editing, and bioprocessing. Earlier this year, we launched Gen Edge, our premium subscription service for exclusive news and insights of critical interest to biotech industry executives and life science professionals. I'll begin by sharing some numbers about the recent and projected growth of the global and US biotech industries. The global biotech industry grew 33% last year to cross the $1 trillion mark, according to Grandview Research, which projects a more than doubling of the industry to $2.44 trillion by 2028. More than half of that industry activity is generated in the US, where the industry group PhRMA, Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, has calculated $560 billion in direct activity last year. PhRMA counts more than 811 direct jobs, supporting more than 4 million US jobs as of last year. Let's take a brief look at drivers behind the past year's growth in biopharma and life sciences. The most obvious driver of activity in the past year is the COVID-19 pandemic, which has led to hundreds of academic and industry collaborations and thousands of clinical trials. How many trials? 7,043 as of this recording, according to clinicaltrials.gov. There are more than 300 drugs and vaccines in development, according to GEN's COVID-19 tracker, which you can access through our website, genengnews.com. Companies that have grown on the strength of their COVID treatments have multiplied their workforces, but broader effects on regions are less certain. I can think of cases where companies' growth here and there has benefited a region, and we'll see some examples of that a little later, but it's hard for me to extrapolate that as a whole. One thing I can say is the pandemic has not slowed down the financing of startups. During the first quarter, biotech early stage companies received more than $10 billion in venture financing, according to the Money Tree report by PwC and CB Insights, double the first quarter of 2020. Now, since then, actually within the last month or so, PwC has said it will no longer publish the public Money Tree report. But I can tell you the trend continued into the second quarter, according to PitchBook and the National Venture Capital Association, which recorded more than $20 billion in biotech venture cap activity in the first half of this year. That's up 37% from the first half of 2020, $14.8 billion, and more than half of the $27+ billion compiled in all of last year. Another factor in terms of money is companies going public through IPOs, either traditional or the special purpose acquisition company or SPAC IPOs. So far this year, we had 49 companies go public in the first half and another 24 since July 1st. So far, close to $10 billion has been raised by these companies, not to mention 3 blank check companies which were formed to create future SPAC IPOs in biotech. Another important factor behind growing biotech and pharma activity is the change in treatment modalities beyond small molecule compounds and monoclonal antibodies. They include things that you've most likely heard of, like cell therapies, gene therapies, RNA-based drugs and vaccines, like some of the COVID-19 vaccines, which have reached patients. The industry group for cell and gene therapy developers, called Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, has tallied up 1,320 ongoing clinical trials worldwide as of the first half of this year, 100 more than a year ago, of which 158 of those were in phase 3. That's almost 12%. As for RNA-based therapeutics, more than 400 therapies are in development, with the FDA having approved 10 therapies and another 22 being in US clinical trials. Also holding significant economic potential is synthetic biology, such as genetic engineered microbes, to develop drugs and other products like food and clothes. McKinsey has estimated approximately $2 trillion of annual direct economic impact from bioengineered products alone in the next decade. And yet another driver of activity, spatial biology, the study of tissues within their own 2D or 3D context. Think of how a GPS captures our location coordinates in an area to create a map and track us within that map. The top 5 private companies in spatial biology have raised a combined $300 million, while top 5 public spatial bio companies generated a combined $500 million in revenues last year. And that doesn't count corporate giants that are in part in the space and expanding within, like Bruker, for example. And that's according to a new list Jen compiled recently. Now, let's meet this year's top 10 US biopharma clusters. The regions will most likely be familiar to you, but with some surprises on who's higher or who's lower on this year's list. Jen ranks the top 10 US biopharma clusters on 5 criteria. NIH funding is taken from the public NIH report database. VC funding, which in the first quarter I could take from the PwC CB Insights Money Tree report, since it was compiled. Those numbers were checked with regional biotech groups, which typically track more venture capital activity and thus more funding than national groups do, just because they have a closer finger, a closer ear to the ground, so to speak. Patents are based on the number of patents containing the word biotechnology awarded since 1976 in cities and suburbs where companies are located. Lab space is based on the total size of market figures and millions of square feet, as compiled by several commercial real estate firms, including JLL, including CBRE, Cushman & Wakefield, Newmark, and some regional real estate firms. Jobs also based on numbers compiled by commercial real estate firms and kept by regional groups as well. Here's where I get my NIH numbers. It's a publicly available database. It's called the NIH report. And venture capital numbers, you see both the Money Tree report, which that data goes up to the first quarter of this year because PwC said they'll no longer be compiling it. However, PitchBook and NVCA compile quarterly reports. Those are publicly available, so you need to register first for those. Also checking with regional groups for venture capital. Our patents, this is the USPTO patent full text and image database that I use. Lab space and job numbers from several commercial real estate firms, as well as the regional groups. And we'll begin our top 10 by heading to the Midwest, the heartland, if you will, to Chicagoland. 5th in jobs, 9th in NIH funding, patents and VC funding, 11th in lab space. But a series of planned developments is likely to improve that low lab space ranking. Chicago's Economic Development Agency says nearly 5 million square feet of lab space is in development in the Windy City. A few examples: Fulton Labs, where developer Trammell Crow and entrepreneur John Flavin in May cut a ribbon to mark completion of a 14-story lab building in the Fulton Market section. Sterling Bay plans to break ground this fall on a 281,000 square foot lab office building at Lincoln Yards. In February, Chicago's Plan Commission approved the first phase, $3.8 billion, of a $7 billion 100-acre mixed-use project. And that first phase includes something called Chicago Arc Innovation Center, 500,000 square feet for a mix of life-sci users. And last year, the University of Illinois joined Governor J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Lori Lightfoot of Chicago to announce something, the 78. It's a $7 billion, 62-acre mixed-use campus on the South Loop. That plan is still pending, and some news reports even say that the project might include a casino. Talk about biotech being a crapshoot. More recently, within the last month, Spark Therapeutics had announced plans for a 1.2 million square foot manufacturing plant in Yangzhou, China. Sparks is based out of Mount Prospect, Illinois, and they're a cancer drug developer. And earlier this year, Governor Pritzker enacted a program that provides a state match of up to $50,000 for qualifying Illinois companies that get an SBIR award. Now, heading east into Raleigh-Durham and Research Triangle Park, or RTP, North Carolina, 5th in NIH funding, 8th in lab space, 10th in patents, VC, and jobs. The ranking doesn't do justice to the quality of science, and especially companies in the region that it's attracted, especially in the recent years. What has kept the region in the top 10 is its attraction of gene and cell therapy and other biotech manufacturing sites. Biogen, for example, saying in March they'll build a gene therapy manufacturing facility at RTP. It would add 90 jobs to the 1,900 they already maintain at RTP. Other new facilities taking shape: Audentes Therapeutics, now owned by Astellas Pharma. They have a $110 million gene therapy production facility in Sanford that's said to start operations next year. Bluebird Bio last year opened its first wholly owned gene and cell manufacturing site at RTP. More than 100 people work there now. In July, Bluebird sold that plant to National Resilience. It's a La Jolla, California-based provider of BioPharma manufacturing services, and the reason is part of a strategic alliance to develop cell therapies. Novartis Gene Therapies last year opened its own manufacturing site in Durham. Pfizer is expanding its gene therapy manufacturing in Sanford, North Carolina. They'd add 340 new jobs to a workforce of 650. And Fujifilm Diosynth Biotechnology said it'll build a $2 billion cell culture manufacturing facility in Holly Springs. That's a 25-minute car ride south of RTP. And an existing site that the company has. That would create 725 jobs by 2028, it is projected, and the company already has 600 jobs at RTP. Beyond cell and gene therapy, Tempus in August said it'll build a genome sequencing lab at RTP. They have assembled, Tempus has one of the world's largest libraries of clinical and molecular data for use in precision medicine. Eli Lilly said in July they're buying 102 acres at RTP. They didn't reveal the price, but did say it's next to where they're already building a $472 million, 460-job manufacturing site for injectable products and delivery devices. Grifols is expanding its blood plasma campus facility, in Clayton, North Carolina. And here's some overall stats. So far this year, nearly $3 billion of new project investment totaling 3,200 jobs has been announced compared to $2.3 billion only, and only 2,800 jobs for all of last year. So numbers keep growing as we head west to northwest to Seattle. And there, life sci growth in recent years has been reflected in encouraging job and money numbers. On the job front, JLL came out with a report earlier this year saying Seattle was the fastest growing area for jobs between 2016 and 2020. Venture capital, here's a number. $3.66 billion raised in the first half of this year. That's up 55% from a year ago, according to the regional, statewide group, Life Science Washington. And Some recent announcements include this one. Just Evotech Biologics in suburban Redmond, Washington, has unveiled something called JPod 1 US, and that's a 130,000 square foot manufacturing site where they'll make antibody therapeutics. That plant was built to manufacture antibodies for the Department of Defense to potentially treat COVID-19. And also growing Alpine Immune Sciences. Last year, they licensed rights to their lead product for systemic lupus erythematosus to AbbVie for $60 million up front, up to $805 million in milestones. And they received the first $45 million of that milestone money in June from AbbVie for clinical progress for that lead candidate. Seattle's seen a parade of IPOs. Sana Biotech raised $627 million just about in net proceeds from their IPO a year after they raised $700 million in private financing. Silverback Therapeutics, $255 million in net proceeds for a developer of targeted drugs versus cancer and chronic viral infections. Athera Pharma raised $146 million last year, regenerative therapy developer for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. However, the shareholders were not happy in June when the stock tanked after the CEO was placed on leave due to allegations of altered images on 4 research papers. Impel Neuropharma raised $80 million in April, and Icosavax, $209 million for virus-like particle vaccines for COVID-19. They're a spin-out of the University of Washington, which last year opened a $230 million Hans Rosling Center for Population Health, whose goal, an ambitious one, is preventing the next pandemic. UW is one of many key institutions in the research ecosystem of Seattle, also the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, the Allen Institute, the Institute for Systems Biology, plus global health institutions like the Gates Foundation and PATH. Heading back east to the city of brotherly love and vicinity, Greater Philadelphia. It is 5th in lab space, tied for 5th with Seattle in venture cap financing, 6th in patents, 8th in NIH funding and jobs. The region has built a cluster within a cluster of cell and gene therapy, universities, researchers, companies, 36 companies specializing in cell or gene therapy, a workforce of 4,900 just in that little specialty, and pioneering researchers like Jim Wilson and Carl June from the University of Pennsylvania, one of numerous institutions in the region. Cell and gene therapy growth has also fueled something of a boom in lab space development, more than 3 million square feet of space under construction. The latest example is in downtown Philadelphia, where Plymouth Group is converting the long vacant Bud Auto Part plant into a 2.4 million square foot campus for cell and gene therapy companies called Bud Bioworks. Also downtown, Brandywine Realty Trust is building a 14-acre Schuylkill Yards campus across from Amtrak's 30th Street station. And there's one city, U-City Square, a $280 million, 400,000 square foot lab office building by Wexford Science and Technology with University City Science Center and Ventas. It's one of 4 projects taking shape on the U-City Square section of town. Among companies drawn there recently, 4 Biotherapeutics. It's a precision oncology company. They said in May they'll open their global HQ in Philadelphia, certainly for clinical, general and administrative and commercial operations, some manufacturing, but the discovery and functional genomics platform team will remain in Jerusalem. In the suburbs, King of Prussia, town of Upper Merion, the Discovery Labs is developing a $1.2 billion campus focused on cell and gene therapy development on an old GlaxoSmithKline property. In May, they signed a lease with the U of Penn to expand their gene therapy program. And the university focuses that program on developing therapies for rare and orphan diseases, as well as acquired and pandemic infectious diseases like COVID-19. Penn Medicine joins GlaxoSmithKline, WuXi Biologics, and the Center for Breakthrough Medicines, which offers preclinical through commercial manufacturing of cell and gene therapies and raw materials. Heading west to Los Angeles and Orange County, California. It's first in jobs, seventh in lab space and NIH funding, eighth in patents and venture capital. The region's building a subcluster of cancer drug developers. One good recent example, Neogene Therapeutics. They're based in Amsterdam, but the T-cell cancer immunotherapy developer said in June that they'll create a U.S. headquarters by leasing 38,000 square feet in Santa Monica that was formerly occupied by Kite Pharma. Now, why did Neogene move to Santa Monica? Their CEO, Karsten Linnemann, told the LA Business Journal it's because Santa Monica and the region have a concentration of talent in cell therapy. That talent is anchored by the largest cancer drug employer in the region, Kite, a Gilead company. They have 1,400 employees in the region, including their headquarters in Santa Monica and a manufacturing site in El Segundo. Investors in Neogene include Kite's founder, Ari Belledigrum, who is among investors in a venture capital firm based in LA and Boston called Vida Ventures. And in June, Vida closed an $825 million third fund. Capital supposed to go to early stage drug developers. Also, speaking of cancer drug developers, Xencor said in July they'll move their headquarters from San Diego to East Pasadena, returning to the region where the company was established back in 1997. Xencor will lease 148,000 square feet, more than 60% of 465 North Halsted. The biggest biopharma in the LA region remains Amgen, whose workforce grew by 900 or 4% last year to 24,300 staffers as of the start of the year. And Los Angeles County has committed $15 million toward a bioscience investment fund for startups. Taking a car ride south to San Diego, third in venture capital, fourth in patents, sixth in lab space, seventh in jobs, and 10th in NIH funding. The biggest biotech news lately has been made by a real estate developer, Alan Gold, whose IQHQ is transforming the Manchester Pacific Gateway property downtown, 8 acres, into a $1.6 billion lab office complex. Construction has begun, and they told the San Diego Union Tribune in June it'll be substantially completed in 2023. San Diego's cluster has built a concentration of genomics employers anchored by research institutions ranging from UC San Diego to the Salk and Scripps Institutes, not to mention sequencing giant Illumina, which wants to grow further by buying the cancer blood test developer based in Menlo Park called Grail, but it's running into opposition from regulators in the US and Europe. San Diego is an outpost for several biopharma giants, R&D labs by Lilly and Bristol Myers Squibb, as well as Japanese pharmas Takeda and Kyowa Kirin. Smaller homegrown companies are going public, most recently Effector Therapeutics, which in May agreed to merge with one of those blank check companies for a SPAC IPO, which would give it 50 million plus toward pipeline development. The deal was approved by the blank check company shareholders August 24th. And Maravai Life Sciences grossed almost $1.9 billion from their going public, which capped a year in which they moved, as well as their trialing biotechnology subsidiary, to expanded headquarters within San Diego. The space was completed in January. Heading back east to the BioHealth Capital Region, Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., third in lab space, patents, and sixth in jobs, seventh in venture capital financing. Now, here is a region where biotech really has grown as a result of COVID-19, but it's not just one company. COVID-19 has allowed the region to build on long-time assets, such as the headquarters of the FDA and the NIH and NIAID and its director, Anthony Fauci, not to mention Johns Hopkins, which accounts for half of the region's total NIH funding, and UMaryland and UVA as well. In August, the regional nonprofit Connected DMV announced the formal launch of a $2.5 billion global pandemic prevention and biodefense center to foster more collaboration among stakeholders on pandemic preparedness and avoidance projects. Their signature initiative would accelerate development of human monoclonal antibodies to treat the world's top 100 pathogens across 25 pathogen families. 5 of the top 10 funded companies in last year's Operation Warp Speed are based in or had substantial operations in the region, including Flow out of Richmond, Virginia, which last year went up to $812 million from over 10 years from BARDA, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. toward manufacturing generic COVID-19 drugs. Novavax, you know about from its COVID-19 vaccine work. Its workforce has ballooned from 100 last year at the start of the pandemic to 500 as of June, with plans to increase to 800 through an expansion of its Gaithersburg headquarters. Also, Vigene Biosciences, which in May was being acquired by Charles River Laboratories. Charles River signaling it intends to expand its cell and gene therapy, contract development and manufacturing organization, or CDMO activity. Heading a little bit north into my home region, New York, New Jersey. Second in jobs and NIH funding, fourth in lab space and VC, fifth in patents. There's a growing pipeline of life science projects in New York City, 1.1 million square feet set to be built through this year, on top of some 850,000 square feet completed since early 2019. Among the key projects, the CURE building, as it's called, at 345 Park Avenue South, Deerfield Management's $635 million conversion, an old office building. Taconic Partners and Ravine Real Estate are converting another building on the west side of Manhattan into 400,000 square feet of life-size space. And Alexandria Real Estate Equities by next year is expected to complete a third building at the Alexandria Center for Life Sciences on Manhattan's east side. It would expand the campus to 1.3 million square feet. Alexandria has other projects in New York City. They completed one in Long Island City in December, and Alexandria also owns the Pfizer headquarters, which could be redeveloped in its existing footprint or could be expanded for additional lab space. Pfizer has 4 years remaining on its lease, though. New York City, according to CBRE, already set a record for lab space leasing with 257,000 square feet leased through the spring. Most of that was the Icahn School of Medicine, taking space at 787 11th Avenue. A dozen academic medical centers in New York City are anchors and generators of life-size startups. A decade ago, the city and its economic development agency persuaded them to finally work together in order to grow life sciences in the Big Apple. And in the suburbs, New York and Westchester County, in July, Regeneron joined New York State officials to announce plans to add 1,000 jobs over the next 5 years at its Tarrytown headquarters as part of a $1.8 billion expansion. You may know of their antibody cocktail for COVID-19 and its use late last year on President Donald Trump. Depending how close Regeneron comes to fulfilling that 1,000 job goal, it could receive up to $100 million in state tax credits. Project construction is expected to be completed by 2027. Two other suburban mega developments are in the works, one a couple of miles west of Regeneron in Valhalla, New York, called North 60, the other at the Nassau Coliseum site on Long Island. And that project is expected to finally begin construction next year after a decade of talks. New Jersey, however, has most of the region's lab space, interestingly, and several big projects. One is the Cove in Jersey City, 1.4 million square feet of lab and office space on the Jersey City Hudson River waterfront. The other is New Brunswick's New Jersey Technology and Innovation Hub, where some institutional anchors were announced at the end of last year: Princeton University, Rutgers U, Hackensack, Meridian Health, RWJ Barnabas Health. Well, let's head west again. San Francisco, first in patents and VC, second in lab space, third in jobs, fourth in NIH funding. COVID-19 has driven a surge of VC funding and some pretty high demand for lab space. Genentech late last year won approval from City Council of South San Francisco to near double its headquarters campus at One DNA Way, as it's called, to 9 million square feet. And that could enable more than 12,500 people to work there, in addition to the 10,000 plus already based there. Among smaller companies, Senti Biosciences in South San Francisco has agreed to lease a site in Alameda for a cell therapy manufacturing plant. And further north in Vacaville, California, Agenus purchased 120 acres at the California Biomanufacturing Center property from housing developer AG Spanos. And it's a milestone in that city's efforts to expand its biotech footprint and try to establish itself as a center for biomanufacturing. Sana Biotech, which is based in Seattle, announced plans in July to build its own manufacturing site in Fremont, California, for T-cell therapies, human stem cells, and viral DNA. Now, finally heading back east into the top cluster the last at least 5 years, Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts, first in NIH funding and lab space, second in patents and VC financing, and fourth in jobs. The statewide industry group MassBio put out its industry snapshot report in late August, had some interesting numbers, more than $4 billion in venture capital raised so far this year compared to $5 billion in all of 2020. They said jobs had grown by 5.5%, and lab space had doubled in space to 40 million square feet over the last 10 years. Talk about one example of COVID driving activities, Moderna. You know about their COVID-19 vaccine. The workforce jumped from 850 at the start of the pandemic to 1,500, and that's spring numbers, so the actual may even be higher. Company has said they'll add 155 people to its manufacturing site in Norwood, Massachusetts, in return for $2 million plus in tax incentives from the Massachusetts Life Science Center. In Cambridge, Divco West broke ground on a 10-story life science building, 375,000 square feet within Cambridge Crossing, their 43-acre campus. Last year, Cambridge Crossing welcomed Bristol Myers Squibb, which signed a lease to consolidate their Cambridge operations on that campus by 2023. And Sanofi sold its plant in Allston section of Boston to Resilience. Boston area also had its own parade of IPOs: Verve Therapeutics, Omega Therapeutics, Elicio Therapeutics, Immuneering, and Nuvalent, while Waltham-based Apellis won its first FDA approval in May for a complement inhibitor designed for a rare blood disease called PNH. And they would be challenging the longtime leader in PNH drugs called Alexion Pharmaceuticals. Now, finally, a look at some up-and-coming regions to watch in the next couple of years. One is Columbus, Ohio, where Amgen had announced plans to build an assembly and packaging plant in the Columbus suburb of New Albany, Ohio, while within Columbus, Forge Biologics, a gene therapy CDMO, is closed on $120 million in Series B financing. And they already run a GMP plant in Columbus that's dedicated to viral vector manufacturing. It's called the Hearth. The Denver, Boulder, Aurora area is also interesting. Two companies generating a lot of news. AGC Biologics, Korean-based, but they bought the old Avexis Novartis gene therapy manufacturing site in Longmont. And that's only 16 miles from where AGC already has a stainless steel mammalian bioprocessing facility in Boulder. Cogent Therapeutics, small molecule therapy developer, in April, they formed a research team by hiring from Pfizer a new chief scientific officer. And in July, Cogent agreed to lease 38,000 square feet of research and office space in Boulder. Houston, Texas, where Novartis Therapeutics raised $74 million. They're a spin out of MD Anderson. And the TMC3 Texas Medical Center 3 Research Campus will see expansion of the Texas Children's Pavilion for Women, part of Texas Children's Hospital. That'll take place over 3 phases, $200 million project announced in July. Last year, Texas A&M broke ground on an innovation plaza, a little mini campus within the campus. As we look ahead, a couple of challenges I take note on. COVID-19 and beyond being one. Since the virus is expected to become endemic as it mutates, one of several pandemics expected to emerge in coming years, regions that lead against SARS-CoV-2 are laying a foundation for long-term life sciences leadership. Also, life sci clusters will, as we're starting to see, attract companies and institutions in areas beyond drugs, not just cell and gene therapy, but genomics and synthetic biology emerging. And big emphasis on supporting clinical trials as healthcare providers play growing roles as anchors of clusters. Regions want to build infrastructure to support more clinical trials and larger clinical trials, such as by recruiting investigators and improving data analysis. And finally, thanks for listening. Let's stay in touch.
We have just heard from Alex Philippidis with Jen on the top 10 biopharma clusters and their standings in 2021. And we saw that there was a little movement amongst some of these different regions in the United States, but we're still holding strong in the BioHealth Capital Region. But in order to do a deeper dive into the BioHealth Capital Region, we have an expert. We have the Executive Managing Director and co-lead of JLL, Mid-Atlantic Life Science Practice, and also the Vice Chair of the BioHealth Innovation Board, Pete Briskman, to give us an overview of how well we've been doing in the BioHealth Capital Region. Pete, welcome to the 7th BioHealth Capital Region Forum.
Rich, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and I want to thank you and the BHI team for having me on the panel. It's an absolute honor. And Alex's information is so fascinating. It's absolutely terrific. So I'm happy to report, as a cluster, the BioHealth Capital Region, we are doing fantastically well. What I'd like to do is a deeper dive into Alex's information related to the BHI cluster and talk about what really makes a cluster like Maryland, DC, Virginia do so well. My perspective is really coming from companies that are either located in our region or looking to relocate into our region, and some of the contributing factors that they look for when understanding a market. So for example, and Alex touched on this, it's very important to have a vibrant community, whether you're considering staying and expanding in a market or whether or not you're considering relocating to the market. And this consists of venture capital activity for funding, IPO activity, NIH funding, M&A activity, access to talent. What sort of talent can we get, and what sort of specific labor is available, particularly as it relates to particular job functions related to R&D and manufacturing. We'll learn today a little bit more about that, and what sort of incentives are out there that the state, county, and local jurisdictions have. And lastly, where does the jurisdiction or a particular cluster region stand related to education and access to federal agencies? And I think, as we all know, the BioHealth Capital Region is ideally located with NIH and FDA smack middle of its region. So I touched on venture capital funding, and one of the drivers is that in the last couple of years, venture capital funding has doubled for our local companies. In fact, over the last 5 years, it's increased by over 715%. The average tenant has been getting funded little less than $30 million, which it's a big jump, and there historically is a direct correlation between this sort of funding and growth by companies. Next slide, please. I touched on it earlier, but the BioHealth Capital Region has been fueled by IPOs recently. Public offering funding totaling over $962 million year to date. Sensi Biotherapeutics and Precigen are two companies that are leading the way in these IPO markets so far. Next slide, please. There's been a record high $2.3 billion in funding by NIH in 2020. And this year, the BioHealth Capital Region is on target to secure even more money, with already $830 million year to date. And this is a contributing factor to new technologies being developed and growing companies. Next slide, please. Historically, the BioHealth Capital Region has been early stage But with all this funding and NIH money and private equity and IPOs, you're seeing more M&A activity. Recent activity is Oncomune being acquired by Merck, Vigene Biosciences being acquired by Charles River Lab. And what that really means to the region is that it's maturing and it's going from pre-commercialization more toward commercialization and manufacturing. Next slide, please. So on the demand side, this has really been a contributing factor to the absorption of space. As these companies are growing, there's needs for different types of space. This could be office space, lab space, or manufacturing. And right now in the BioHealth Capital Region, vacancy rates for lab space sit below 3% at 2.5%, which historically has been closer to 10%. So right now, and you'll hear about it later on in the discussion, there is a need for new lab space and manufacturing space to be developed, and you'll see that developers are meeting this demand through a number of different ways. Next slide, please. The office market has experienced more vacancy over the last couple of years due to the pandemic and other contributing factors. However, conversely, the lab market, the vacancy rates are going down. And we're seeing an office market of over 20% vacant right now, and the lab market, as I touched on, below 3%. So this has opened up the door and opportunity for lab conversions, office conversions into lab, where you take the larger vacancy office space and you convert it to lab to fill the need. And that is one trend that we're seeing happen in our region. Next slide. When you look at different clusters around the country, including Boston, San Diego, Los Angeles, Philly, right now, the vacancy rate is lowest in the BioHealth Capital Region, which means that the demand right now is very, very strong for lab space and R&D space. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We're seeing an interesting rental trend where, because the demand is so low, that the rental rates are going up. Historically, rental rates have been below $30 for standard R&D type space, but right now it's averaging a little bit under $37 triple net. So there's year over year growth of over 22% increase in rent. Next slide, please. But that's not such a bad thing. Looking at other regions and how the BioHealth Capital Region compares to some of the other top clusters, when you look at New York, the average rental rate for research and development lab space is $93.22 per square foot. Or conversely, in suburban Maryland and beyond the BioHealth Capital Region, the average is under $40 per square foot triple net. So less than half. Boston is $85 per square foot. So even though the rents are increasing in the BioHealth Capital Region because of demand and low vacancy, in comparison to all the other clusters, if you're a company looking for space and you need to grow either your manufacturing capability, et cetera, the BioHealth Capital Region is nearly half the average rental rate compared to the other top clusters, which makes it actually a bargain. Next slide, please. So how is the BioHealth Capital Region tackling this low vacancy and anticipated future growth? Well, there's 10 million square feet of general lab supply in the region, with 246,000 square feet of new supply delivered over the last 3 years. and 364,000 square feet on top of the new lab supply of office product conversion. So over the next couple of years, there's another 853,000 square feet under construction, with the potential for another 1.8 million square feet and 662,000 square feet of office product under conversion into lab. So what we could see is an increase of nearly 35% of asset types, of lab asset types, which that should hopefully meet the demand of these growing tenants, because it's very critical when you're looking at these different clusters and where to relocate to. Not only are there a host of other things outside of real estate, but if you can't find space and you can't find the type of space that you're looking for, chances are you're not going to locate to that particular region. And what we're seeing in the BioHealth Capital Region is forward thinking and new development and office conversions to satisfy that demand. Next slide, please. Here's an example of some of the buildings under construction. And these owners include Alexandria Realty and the Manton. You can see it's different product types. It's trophy lab buildings that are being developed, and traditional R&D, to manufacturing buildings that are tilt-up warehouse being constructed to meet these manufacturing needs. Next slide, please. And we talked about office conversions. 700 Quince Orchard would be a good example of a former office building now recently converted to lab and manufacturing, where a group like Novavax will be relocating to that building and expanding into it and helping fight COVID and the pandemic and creating the vaccine so everybody can have access to it. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's the future of the BioHealth Capital Region, and where do we see the BioHealth Capital Region stacking up 1 year, 2, 3 years from now? I think it's very possible by 2023, we're in the top 3 because the region will continue to thrive as we see early stage companies mature to pre-commercialization to commercialization. I think we're going to see a higher velocity of venture capital investment. That trend will continue, along with M&A activity. FDA approvals are disproportionately high in the BioHealth Capital Region in 2020 and 2021. Several companies are receiving phase 2, phase 3 approvals. And I think we're going to continue seeing that. A lot of it because of NIH funding and the public offerings, et cetera. And this will lead to more tenant expansion, in my opinion, which will also lead to more speculative construction, where historically that hasn't been done in the past. We'll see more office conversions. And as a result, there'll be more interest from outside institutional owners that want to come to the BioHealth Capital Region and invest in our region. And the trend of companies relocating from outside the BHI into the BioHealth Capital Region should continue. Recent examples of that include Loom and TCR Squared relocating into the BioHealth Capital Region and taking a good amount of space to accommodate their headcount and their science. And then I think that we're going to continue to see the delivery of different product types to meet the tenant demand. So specifically, we envision landlords will become more adept at delivering different product types to meet the needs of science. This includes turnkey labs for the early stage companies so they can preserve their cash and capital expenditures and move into space right away. We'll also see more manufacturing buildings being built geared toward more mature tenants a little bit further along in the life cycle. They typically require more operational control for their large scale production. And then I think that we're going to see a trend towards urbanization. And looking at some of the other clusters that Alex mentioned, a lot of them are along the metro lines. And I would envision that this will continue to occur around the country in terms of development. And we're going to see it right here in the BioHealth Capital Region. It'll help attract employees and transport employees from different parts to different communities where these are major hubs for biotech. And I think we're going to see additional concessions at the state, county, and city level that expand upon their policies to meet and align with the growth of these tenants, either already in our region to retain them or to attract new companies. So all in all, I'm very high on the BioHealth Capital Region, and I predict continued growth. Thank you, Rich.